crime podcast. So we air live on YouTube on the Andrea Up Late channel every Tuesday night at 7 Central. And then drop the shows and you can stream it wherever you listen to your podcasts pretty soon after that, usually the next day. So you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, all that good stuff. So usually I have rotating co-hosts. Sometimes I do the show solo. I am pumped because tonight I do have some friends popping on. It's Beth and Greg from the Bar is Open podcast, and we're going to get them on screen now. Let's see here. Boop, 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 boop. Hey, guys.
Hey, how are you, Andrea?
How are you?
Good. How are y'all doing?
Great. Thanks for having us back.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. It's always fun with these shows.
I know. I feel like I've done y'all's show the last couple times, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Since y'all have been on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, for you guys listening that maybe don't usually listen to this show, there are a few different podcasts that a few of us are associated with, and we kind of sometimes intermingle and whatnot. And so that makes it fun because a lot of us have a lot of the same listeners. And so it just brings a kind of a common thread that weaves through a lot of us, and it's a lot of fun. So it's fun to bring back people that we enjoy talking to for different cases. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. And I always enjoy getting Beth and Greg's opinion and reactions and questions from them. They ask good questions, and it's always a lot of fun. So we've got a lot of people in the chats. This is a live show, so we will occasionally respond to people in the chats. And but first and foremost, it is a podcast. So we look forward to you listening and hope you enjoy it tonight. We've got a weird one, guys. I don't know. I didn't even tell you what this case was, right?
Just a very little thing in a note, but that was it. So I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to be one that's going to be a little easier to talk about in the sense that listeners, we usually, or on night shift, I generally do a lot of unsolved cases, or at least like super curious cases, which this one's going to fall into that realm. So let's get talking. We're going back to 1997 is when this crime occurred. And then you can decide for yourselves whether or not it was in fact a crime. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the Falater couple. It's Falater. It's kind of a different last name, so I want to make sure you know exactly what I'm saying when I say it. So it's we've got a lot of interesting names in this case. But so we're going to go back to Scott Falater. He's going to be the man, the myth, and some kind of a legend that we're talking about tonight. Scott was born, he was raised in Illinois. He meets a girl named Yarmila in college. All right. So they go to college together. They were both raised Catholic, but at some point, I believe during their junior year of college, Scott meets a bunch of kids that were active on the Mormon scene there on campus. Okay, so he starts ingratiating himself upon them. They enjoy each other's company, and he decides that he wants to leave Catholicism and join the Mormon church. So he does, and he does it wholeheartedly. So he gets baptized into the Mormon church, starts really learning their teachings, is really, really into it. Now, Yarmila, his girlfriend, they were, a pretty serious college couple. She at first was like, yeah, I'll go along with it. I'll do what you do. I think that she wasn't necessarily super ingrained in her Catholic upbringing, one way or another. So I don't think she was also, or reports state that she wasn't super ingrained in the Mormon church either. So she decides to go along with it. And then when Scott encourages her to be baptized into the Mormon church, y'all, these are some big steps. These are college kids leaving the religion that they both were brought up in. And now, he's like, I need you to come be baptized into this too. Mm-hmm. And, so that's like a lot of big stuff. So she said she would.
In college and doing all the other things that you should be doing.
All the other things that you need to be preparing for and thinking about. Exactly. So she does, though. She said that she would get baptized as a Mormon. But as the time approaches where she needs to be doing that, she kind of decides, you know what, actually, I'm not really down with this. I kind of don't want to. And that caused a big argument, and they broke up. So he was pretty convicted at this point in the Mormon faith. And so they break up, but a little bit of time goes by and they decide that they want to be together. So she kind of concedes and says, all right, I'll do it, whatever. So she does. She gets baptized into the Mormon faith. And then they actually soon after get married. They get married before they graduate college. Listen, let me give you what do they call it these days? A pro tip, a life hack.
If you will, a life hack.
If you've done that and succeeded, wonderful. If you haven't done that and you're considering it, don't. Don't. It's so young. Don't do
So young.
that.
Beth did that.
I didn't do that. I got
That
married.
was
Yeah, I
pretty
got married
close.
5 weeks out of college, but yeah.
It's
It
not
was
a lot
not
different.
far from you. Yeah, it wasn't too far from you. And it's just, I'm not saying it can't work, y'all, but there's no rush. Let me tell you this quick side note. I have been, a lot of you know that I am a nurse. And so I have been lately orienting some new nurses that are seniors in college, right? And so it's all perspective. It doesn't matter. But seeing them now, and I think about where I was then and how grown I was and how much I had it figured out. And I see them and they seem so young to me now. Obviously, it's, a story as old as time that we say things like this. But a few of the girls were starting to say, oh gosh, this was not a saying when I was in college, but they were saying ring before spring. 2 different girls I oriented said this, and they said ring before spring. And I said, I'm sorry, what? Like, is that what we're doing? And they're like, yeah, there's just, this big rush to get engaged, before we graduate. And I literally, the last girl, I said, why? Like, why?
Yeah.
Could she
Why
even
is that a
answer
time
you?
stipulation? Now, the last girl was actually super cool. She had it together. She thought that was ridiculous. And she was like, yeah, I love my guy. I've got a serious boyfriend. We may move in together, whatever. And she was like, but I have no desire to like, seal the deal legally on that bad boy.
Mhm.
So she had it together. But I said, why, I don't know why that's a rush. Either way, let's
Life
not.
advice.
So yeah, let's not.
It's just
You can
good
come to
life
Night
advice.
Shift for true crime and life advice.
Maybe leave with a little something extra. Exactly.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know?
In
It does,
these
because
cases, many
some
can.
of this stuff can cause the true crime, which
Yeah.
is the content for the show that we have tonight. So they get married prior to college graduation. They quickly kind of settle into things. Eventually, at some point, they move out to Arizona, and that's where the rest of things take place. So Scott and Yarmila have a couple of kids by 1997. Scott was an engineer for Motorola, and he wasn't just any engineer, if you will. I think he had a couple of patents under his belt, and he was heading up quite a few different like big projects within the company at that time, which I understand that Motorola does have its fingers in different things other than just cell phones. But I would assume that in 1997,
Absolutely.
Motorola was a big company to be involved in at, with the advent of cell phones, or not the advent, but the, explosion of them, if you will.
Mhm.
So, hey, everybody in the chats, by the way, I am seeing you guys. I'm just trying to get through the story, but I want to say hello. So he's super busy. By now he's working. Some of his weeks are like 70, pushing 80-hour work weeks. So guy is never home and he's stressed. He's making a ton of money, but there's a lot of money on the line at his work and he's heading up these projects, right? So Yarmila, they went on, by the way, to both enroll in masters. So as soon as they finished their undergrad, they both received master's degrees around the same time. So at this point, they both have master degrees. Like I said, he's an engineer at Motorola, and Yarmila was, I think, teaching like a preschool class. Sometimes that sounds like it's getting dismissed, but either way, like that's the dynamic they had. It probably allowed her to be home quite a bit more for the 2 children they had. So their kids were like young teenagers at this point. It was a boy and a girl. All right. So there is a pretty heavy consensus around between both of their families and their friends that their family was what you would consider just cookie cutter, happy. No one knew of any strife in the marriage. There didn't seem to be any financial issues, no adultery. addictions, any of these things. The kids even later will talk about some of their stuff that they had to say, but they said the same things. Like mom and dad never fought. Like everybody was very happy at home, and not like in a weird, we're so perfect and happy kind of way. It just seemed like, like there was nothing.
Just an average family.
Just an average family.
Worked hard and
exactly.
With 2.3 kids and all that good stuff.
Exactly. Well, exactly, because they had a golden retriever. So exactly, right? So on the night that we're speaking of, this would have been the night of January 17th, 1997. It had been a normal day. Scott had done some Bible study work at the church after his job, which was pretty par for the course. He had taken the daughter to one of her after school activities and come back. So the evening arises and you've got all 4 people are at home. And I guess Yarmila had asked Scott to go outside and work on the pool. Let me show you the pool we're speaking of, because that can mean a whole lot of different things to people. And so she said there's like something called the O-ring, and it's like a rubberized ring in the filter. You guys just got a pool. You might know about this.
I had this happen in our Phoenix house. Yeah, we had a pool there too.
Well, this is in Phoenix, so maybe I need to keep you for questioning after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
After the episode.
So, I know where that Motorola building is. Yeah. Specifically, because that's why I wrote down where is this, because it was right down the street from where I worked when I graduated college.
Okay. I have the address of the home somewhere here. I'll pull up in a minute. But this is a picture of the home and the pool. And you guys, if you're listening, this will all be on my Instagram at Andrea Uplate. You'll be able to see the media from this show. So this is the house in question and the pool. So they've got a big pool in the backyard. It takes up, for our listeners, most of at least I'd say over half of the backyard. But it's Phoenix, so that makes sense, right?
It's very
what
common
else were you going to do?
Ours did the same thing when we had a house a few years back. It was half the yard, the other half was grass. Just like that.
Just like that.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So this is for our listeners, it looks like a nice, pretty large home and large pool, nice backyard. Now the houses are right on top of each other. They look 6 inches apart from each other.
Common too.
Is that common? Okay. Yeah. So that's a pretty, it looks like a pretty nice neighborhood. So that's the pool that you can kind of get in your head if you're watching this, that we're speaking of. So this night, or this evening, I should say, around like 8:30, 9 o'clock, Yarmila has asked Scott to go outside and work on that O-ring. So per Scott's account, he took his tools. He took, I believe, a screwdriver and some pliers out to the pool to work on this. He's out there for a while. He's exhausted. It's been, like I said, these crazy 70, 80-hour work weeks. And so he comes on in at some point. He says, like, between 9 and 9:30, he tells her, hey, look, like, I'm beat. I can't even see what I'm doing out there. I'll revisit that tomorrow. And she says, okay. So the night is kind of going on. Michael, their son, tells them goodnight around 9:30, I believe, and goes to bed. And then Scott will say that between like 10 and 10:30, he goes to bed. All right. So he goes to bed. Next thing you know, there's a 911 call. The 911 call is from the neighbor, a man named Greg Coons. Oh my gosh, Greg. I just realized his name was Greg. And you were in Phoenix and you had a pool with an O-ring problem.
It's not my house.
All right. This is all getting really weird tonight. This is more true crime than I realized it was going to be. Okay, so let me pull up this 911 call. Y'all, there's a lot of white noise in it. There was no way to really clear that up. Every recording I found of it kind of sounded like this. This call does go on for a few minutes, but I'm going to play like 19, 20 seconds of it. You can kind of get the gist if you listen closely. So let's listen to what Greg says when he calls 911. Maybe. Come on now.
What emergency? I don't know. My neighbors, there was a bunch of yelling and screaming going on. I looked over the fence, and the husband just threw, I believe, the wife into the pool, and it looks like she's holding her underwater. All right, I'll get somebody out there. Thank you. Thank you. 911, 911, what emergency? I don't know. My neighbors, there was a bunch of yelling and screaming.
All right, let's turn that off.
And I hope that
Listen again,
I
actually.
believe the wife
Yeah.
just pulled and looked like she's holding her underwater. All right, I'll get somebody out there.
Oh shit.
Thank you.
He's holding her underwater.
Or floating underwater. I couldn't tell.
Right. So it's difficult. Come on, let's go.
I thought
Okay,
it said
okay.
he was holding her
I can-
underwater.
Right.
I thought
So I just put up a picture of Scott and Yarmila for anybody watching. And Greg, actually, first of all, when you were like surprised when you just said that, I thought that you saw the picture I just put up and you were going to say, like, I knew them when I lived in Phoenix.
No,
And
I did move there in '97 though.
okay, for real?
Yep. Went to Scottsdale
Beth?
Community College.
Not me. I wasn't there yet.
Beth, does Greg sleepwalk
Do I
by
look like
chance?
that man?
No, he does not.
Okay.
He sleep talks, though.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, there's a.
It's probably some sort of psychosis in there. Whatever.
It's a that's the gateway.
Oh, good. Thank you for telling her that. She's gonna chain me to the bed.
So you were right though, Greg. The neighbor is saying, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking over into my neighbor's yard and it looks like he's holding her head underwater. That's what
Okay.
the neighbor is saying. So what happens is a little bit after this, so let's say that call was made at 57 p.m. on the night of January 17th. Okay. Scott will tell you that he went to bed and the next thing he knows, he wakes up standing at the top of his stairs to policemen barging in the front door at around a little like 11:30 or so that night. Okay. That's his next memory of events after going to bed. He was wearing a white t-shirt and black and red plaid like PJ pants. And the cops are rushing in, asking him how many people are in the home. He says, 4 of us, myself, my wife, and our 2 children who are all sleeping. Okay. And he gets taken to the police station where he is told that his wife has been murdered. Okay. So the neighbor is saying that he's seeing Scott doing these things. Well, what had happened was Yarmila was actually stabbed 44 times to the upper chest, back, a little bit to the neck. She had a lot of what can be described as defensive wounds. I do want to say, guys, that a lot of times we hear people say defensive wounds, and that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes someone who is wildly yielding a knife might just get your hands.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that it's always defensive, right? Meaning that like maybe the first or second blow with the knife rendered you incapacitated and, you know, they're just still wildly flinging and cutting you. These, though, I would say are in fact that, because she had a lot of, we good, guys? Are you there?
Yeah, we're here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. My little comment section kind of went away. She had a lot of palmar wounds. So the insides of her palms were cut up. Okay. So it does look quite a bit more like actual defensive wounds. Okay.
Is that like trying to grab the knife or something like, or just putting your hands up and trying to stop?
But a lot of times people will actually grab the knife, right? You're trying to defuse that threat.
Yeah.
Yes. You don't care about your hands getting caught, nor are you even thinking about that in the moment. You just want to grab it and get it out of their hands, or, you know, push it away from your face or whatever. So she had 44 stab wounds and ultimately was drowned. In fact, on the autopsy report, I believe the cause of death was listed as stab wounds, knife wounds with drowning. And we'll talk about what that looks like later when they press that medical examiner a little further to say more specifically what exactly caused her death. So it sounds like, oh gosh, Michael Hendricks in the chat said baptism. Okay. So the defense will say, eventually, they come to say that this was, in fact, a horrible, horrible case of sleepwalking gone wrong. Okay. So at first, Scott will say to you that he doesn't think that it's sleepwalking. At first, he says that he gets to the police station. He has a tad bit of blood on his neck. The police ask him about the night. He has no recollection other than sleeping. And when the neighbor had made the phone call, they say to Scott something about him killing his wife. And he immediately says, "What are you talking about? Of course I didn't do it." And then they explain the phone call. They're like, "No, your neighbor called and said XYZ." Okay. And we'll talk more about what that neighbor said in those calls moving forward. But then Scott pretty quickly just kind of conceded to it. He has never, to this day, he's never denied that he killed Yarmila. He will, however, to this day, state that he does not recall any of it. He says that he was sleepwalking the whole time. So that's what is going to come into question. I will say, fast forward, spoiler alert, he was convicted of murder. We're going to talk about what that trial looked like, but he was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to life without the possibility, I've got it written down here, of parole. Okay. Now, what comes into play is the idea of whether or not he was actually sleepwalking, and that is the defense's whole case. That's all they've got. And at first, they didn't have that. And then they hear from mom and sister of Scott that he has a history of sleepwalking. And then they build this case around that defense. And then Scott will say at first that he disagreed, that he wasn't sleepwalking when it happened. But the more he's told about what happened to her, he says that's the only thing it could have been, that I was sleepwalking, because I have no recollection of these events. Do you guys have any questions yet before I continue?
So, yeah. Go ahead. You go.
So you said he had just a little bit of blood on his neck? I feel like 40 stab wounds would have been a lot more blood. Did they find like another shirt or something that had more blood on it?
Oh, did they? So when they found Scott, when they got to his home, he was standing at the top of the stairs. He looked startled, which would make sense as they're rushing in the door. He had on a clean white t-shirt. I'm going to have to put this in the chats or on Instagram, because I thought I uploaded it here to this and I didn't. You'll need to see this. He's wearing a very clean white t-shirt. And like I said, those black and red flannel plaid, very common PJ bottoms. Everything is clean, not disheveled. The only markings he had on him, like I said, was that one smudge of blood. Okay. So as the cops start to investigate, they get to the home. They take him, like I said, to the police station. They break the news to him there that she is dead. But to them, they're not breaking news, right? To them, they're asking him why he just murdered his wife. As they start to investigate at the home, they go around back and find in the pool what many of them have said was just a most horrific sight, as you can imagine. They said they equated it to look like a shark attack. The Yarmila was floating in the pool that was crimson.
Yeah.
Right. So, oh my goodness. So what happens is the neighbor makes the phone call, right, to 911. So the neighbor and his girlfriend lived together. I think they've since gotten married. They've talked to a few news outlets here and there on this case, but his girlfriend at the time, heard something outside. At first they heard some like moans and some kind of screams that were muffled at first. To the point that at first they thought that someone might be like having sex out back in the neighbor's yard. That's kind of what they thought. And so like they knew their neighbors, but they weren't buddies with them, right? They weren't close with their neighbors. They were just kind of, very much acquaintances.
Cordial. Yeah.
They were cordial, and that was it. So I think, you've got a lot of neighborhoods. You've got a lot of people who are just kind of hands off, right? They might live next to you. They don't have to be your buddy. So I think at first didn't want to stick their nose in anybody else's business, kind of let it go. But then the screams kind of increased, and then it got quiet, and then they got confused and, a bit inquisitive. So that's when Greg looked out. And when he looked out, he saw a woman lying on the ground that he didn't know to be Yarmila in the moment. She was lying on the ground, kind of moving slowly, starting to almost try to stand up, he said it looked like, but couldn't. At first, he thought that it was someone who was just very drunk. Again, didn't realize it was Yarmila. And you've got to think, we've talked about this kind of thing. When you think you're seeing something, you're the first thing you're not thinking that someone is getting murdered. Like, I don't think you're looking out your back window and that's where your brain goes. So your brain's trying to make sense of what you're seeing, and you don't quite get it. So, because this has been something he's been asked later, like, why didn't you call quicker? Why didn't you yell for him to stop? Why didn't you whatever? And he's like,
do something.
I didn't know what I was seeing. Like, you know what I mean? Till when it caught up with me, I called 911, when I saw it happen.
Why didn't you jump over the fence and stop him from drowning? You know what I mean? If you really, that's some pretty good armchair quarterbacking here, right?
True, exactly. And I think, obviously, I'm sure if he had this to do all over again, he would have done a lot of things different in that moment. But so he says that he looks out, he sees this of this woman slowly trying to stand, cannot get her bearings. She's he doesn't say semi-conscious, but we learn later, basically, she was probably pretty much out of it, but writhing around a bit. And then he sees Michael come outside. Like, Michael wasn't on the back patio or, backyard when he first looked out and saw Yarmila. So Scott walks outside. Greg, the neighbor, sees Scott look down at Yarmila. There are some reports that say he places his hand kind of over her face. We learn later you would think maybe, he's checking to see if she's breathing. He stands there for a moment looking at her, about a minute, I believe Greg says. And then Scott walks in the home, where Greg then notices the second floor, a light turns on. And it was either the bathroom or the kitchen. There are alternating reports, but I believe the kitchen is where it was, to the point where you don't know specifically, but it sounds like Greg saw him. He thinks the man's washing his hands. That's what it seems to be happening in this window. And then a couple moments later, Scott comes downstairs out the back door. The dog at this point is starting to whimper and whine and bark. And he shushes the dog, pats and shushes the dog. As he's walking out, he has on one glove and he is putting the other glove on. He then takes Yarmila by the hands, drags her to the edge of the pool, kneels behind her, and rolls her in. All of this happened, you've got to think, I'm saying it very specifically step by step, but this all happened in a matter of moments. Greg looks over. He still thinks there's like a drunk lady laying in the yard, right? So then all this just kind of happens. And then I think once he realizes, it's like, everything catches up probably in just rapid speed in his brain. And that's when he calls 911. But he said when he first looked over and saw Scott and Yarmila in the water and realizes, now he's starting to realize he thinks it's Yarmila. So when he saw him roll her into the water, at first he said, I thought he was like holding her head up out of the water. So he's not said as much that I've heard, but it almost sounds like
something.
Yeah, well, it almost sounds like he thought maybe this was like a drunk lady and that maybe he was trying to like wake her up or something, but like keeping her head out of the water. I don't know, but he thought that it looked like he was holding her head up. And then as he looked closer, he realizes he's actually holding her head down into the water. And that's when he calls 911. Like, holy crap, like, here we go. This is a whole different thing than I thought I was seeing. So he calls 911 and that's where the rest of it catches up. So in answer to your question about bloody clothing, police then, as they're investigating the home and working the scene, look into his Volvo. He had a Volvo that we find out later was parked in the garage in a pretty tight fit, like the way to access the trunk is kind of a tight fit. This is important. And that usually he keeps it locked. This is different than to what Scott would say at trial. But they access the Volvo, and when they raise the trunk, they start to search the vehicle. And then if you raise the trunk and then raise the spare tire access over the rear wheel well, there was like a big Tupperware container, like a big plastic one, like with a lid. Mm-hmm. And inside that were bloody work boots, a knife with a sheath, and 2 sets of clothing. Now, something to note, I didn't know this. I guess it's very common in the Mormon religion, or at least if you're following it closely, to wear like 2 layers of clothing. So the under layer is kind of a thin, just underlayer, top and bottom, that you would wear under your regular clothes. Evidently, you wear these at all times unless you only remove them if they've been soiled and you need to launder them, or if you're just going on to, change clothes or get in the shower. Otherwise, you always have these on. So that would explain the 2 sets of clothing. For him, it would be 1 set of clothing, right? But it was like 2 shirts and 2 pants. The work boots, the knife, the sheath, and then, which we'll talk about later, this athletic, they call it an athletic mouthpiece. I'm assuming they mean like a mouth guard, think football player or something like that.
Yeah.
These were the things that were in this Tupperware that were in over the wheel well, in the spare tire access, in the trunk of the Volvo.
So they were hidden.
They were hidden.
So question real quick.
Please. Because to be fair, now we can talk point counterpoint or what the prosecution laid out versus what the defense laid out. But in terms of just the case, that is the case.
That's the case. Yeah. So I'm thinking like evidence. That's where my head goes.
Well, and
aside from that,
medicine, did he take sleep medicine or any kind of medicine?
So he had been more recently, he had been taking some no-dos. Just for, if you're not familiar,
like
you guys,
caffeine,
it's
right?
for a caffeine effect. Exactly. Again, he was working 70, 80 hours on these huge projects at work. He was exhausted and he was starting to even almost fall asleep at work a little bit. That was corroborated per coworkers. And if you know about sleepwalking, emotional stress and lack of sleep or disturbance in sleep pattern can trigger sleepwalking. So for the defense side, we do have that. Those things make sense at least, but no other medication that would make him like out of his mind, if you will, or have an amnesiac effect.
Yeah.
Did they find blood trails throughout the house or anything like that they note?
They did not. Everything looks like the crime took place outside.
So she had to come outside for some reason, or he dragged her out or something like that.
Right.
In order to.
Well, I think an easy prosecutorial point could be he could even just say, hey, come check out this pool filter.
Or something. Right.
Get her out
because it doesn't matter.
The O-ring that he wanted her to fix.
Yeah.
She wanted him to fix earlier. Interesting. Huh. I want to hear now. I do want to hear like the defense. Like I want to hear that stuff because I'm like,
how does sleepwalking?
Well, I'm like, there's no way that this man.
There's some crazy cases out there that have like some wild defenses.
Right.
But yeah, this is crazy.
Right.
It is. So, okay. So I will tell you this. I know where I stand on this at this point. I don't think he was sleepwalking, and we'll get to the end. I do want to hear y'all's. I love it when we have these kind of weird cases because there's been a few that I've done that, toward the end of it, it's still a bit inconclusive or people have differing opinions. And I love it when you guys either get in the chats or get on Instagram and tell me what you think. And Beth and Greg, I want to hear, of course, y'all's opinion on this when we get it all wrapped up. I do think this was with full malicious intent. I do not think he was in a sleep state. And he was convicted of such. So I'm not just spewing slander over here. Right. Now, I will tell you this, though. If the defense does a decent job, which in theory, right, we know our justice system, the defense doesn't have to do any job. They're there simply to defend, and it's all the prosecution's burden to present a case and prosecute him for this. And really, in this case, all they had to do was poke a few holes in the defense's case, and that would absolve any reasonable doubt, right? Or give them reasonable doubt, excuse me, the jury. So, now listen, the more I read a lot of court documents, I'm hearing the testimony from defense. I'm hearing what they had to say. Of course, they're going to, each side is going to hire experts that's going to posture to their opinion, right? To what they need to be said. But they did a good enough job that my brain starts doing a thing like, well, could it have been? And I say that,
right?
Right. It does plant a seed of doubt. And only because strictly because sleepwalking is not an exact science. It's not black and white. We don't have a ton of cases. I did look into that. We'll talk about that in a moment, but cases where murder occurred with sleepwalking used as a defense and whether or not people were convicted or acquitted of it. But it's not an exact science. And so it does make your brain start to say, well, I don't know. In the craziest of cases, could this have happened, And I was just joking last night with VC Sanders about this, saying, this is why specifically, those CAPTCHA, whatever, the I'm not a robot things you have to do on the computer. And then it's like the 9 square grid that's like, click all the boxes that show a crosswalk. And then one of them might be because it's stairs or crosswalks kill me, because then there's like a shadow of the stairs. And so I'm like, are they considering that shadow part of the stairs, or is that now a shadow in robot land? I don't know. This is another reason I won't ever take a polygraph. You guys, if I ever get jammed up for something and I deny a polygraph, that doesn't mean I'm guilty. It's because I get in my brain and I'm sure I will skew the results. So with this, I start thinking, and my brain does all that, like, well, what if? At the end of the day, it can't make sense to me. So when it comes to sleepwalking, he does have a history of sleepwalking. His sister will recount an episode when I believe he was a teenager, or they were both teenagers, and she came home and it was late at night. Everyone else was asleep, and she found Scott washing the dishes in their family home. And when she approached him and touched him by the shoulder to turn him around, she was familiar with his sleepwalking. He immediately was combative and threw her across the room. The mother corroborated this story. That in and of itself can be common with sleepwalking. So as I started to read into it more, and you guys in the chats, if y'all are sleepwalkers, or know someone who is, let me know any kind of stories you have similar to this at all. So with sleepwalking, evidently your brain is like at baseline in either essentially a vulnerable spot, which can tend toward either fright or combativeness when confronted physically, sometimes verbally. But let's say, Beth, that you find Greg wandering through the home and you try to take him by the shoulders and turn him around and try to wake him up or whatever. Someone that can lead someone in that sleep stupor or that semi-conscious awake state to lash out. Right. It could be with a fist. In this case, when Scott was a teenager, he threw his sister quickly across the room. He woke up soon after, though. If they have a knife in their hand, you could get stabbed. That could happen.
If they're doing the dishes, something weird.
That's reasonable to say that could happen. The difference is there is no purposeful movement with sleepwalking. You would maybe follow. You've got to think. Usually, eyes can be open but glazed over, but you're not recognizing things. You're not focusing or taking anything in. So you can look at a person in the room with you while you're sleepwalking and not take in their face. You don't know that that's who that person is. Okay. So that's important. In a moment, we'll talk about that. But let's say the lights are dim in your room because it's nighttime and you were asleep. You get out of bed. People can often kind of walk around things that they normally would walk around. They can follow their pattern of daily life, or, maybe, pick up a towel and throw it either in the hamper or maybe in the toilet thinking it's the hamper or whatever, like kind of do these, mimic your day-to-day routine. But there's generally not purposeful action. There's not recognition. Do you remember him shushing the dog?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's he's telling him. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Also,
or repeating an act 45 times or 44 times.
I mean, that seems, when you say there's no like solid like movement, that seems very solid to me. Like that was purposeful. That was
and you've got to think he's not only making the actual gesture, the movement of stabbing, she's fighting back. So she's screaming to the point that neighbors are hearing it, right?
Right. And so she's waking him up.
And she so she's physically fighting and screaming, and he's not waking up. And think about, there are 60 seconds in a minute. She was stabbed 44 times. This guy, kind of a scrawny dude. Like, I'm not saying he didn't have any strength to him, but that takes force to stab a human body. You're hitting ribs, you're hitting, you know what I mean? Like, so you've got to think, if he's doing it in under a minute, if you're looking at him being asleep, let's say, I mean, he's just pow, 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 like, you're going to sweat. You're going to get exhausted.
Yeah. I feel like you would have woken up, because that's exertion.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a lot
just
of
not
exertion.
Swatting something away.
Yeah.
That's not like, you know what I mean? Get out of my way.
Or having a conversation. Like, those are all mindless, doable while you're sleeping. But this is exertion. Yeah.
Interesting.
Right. So when he gets arrested, so they do go in and arrest him for her murder. Again, he never denies that he did it. Okay. So They arrest him, and while he's awaiting trial, they bring in these sleep experts, and they do run a 4-day sleep study on him. Now, they find something called, I believe it was like the delta wave, and they talk about this sleep called like the N3 stage of sleep, which is right before your REM sleep. I learned more about sleep. I don't care about sleep studies, but so if they find this certain wave in your brain activity during sleep, that would be indicative of you being a candidate of sleepwalking. Like, essentially, if your brain doesn't go there, you probably are not a sleepwalker. He did in fact have it, which was consistent with family story that he had been a sleepwalker. Now, generally by the age of 9 to 12, children grow out of sleepwalking. So only 2 to 6% of adults continue to sleepwalk. So it's a bit of a rarity in and of itself, but it sounds like he did. It sounds like he probably was a sleepwalker, and maybe he even had a recent episode under all the stress he was under and lack of sleep and these kinds of things. One would question then, though, there was a case that had happened about 9 years prior where someone was acquitted of a murder when a man in Canada he drove 14 miles and bludgeoned his mother-in-law to death with a crowbar and then stabbed her with a knife. She succumbed to those wounds and died. His father-in-law was also beaten savagely but survived. He actually still awaits trial in that beating last I saw, but he was acquitted of her murder with the defense of sleepwalking. That was 8 years prior to Scott's case with Yarmila. So the argument that some would make is that he's heard of that case or of a case and knows that he is a sleepwalker and decided to use that when you're looking at the premeditation portion and use that as his own defense.
Well, and as defense attorneys, don't you have to try to grab onto something?
Anything,
so,
right?
Right. Well, and so they were going to go.
It may get you out of like the death penalty or whatever.
Right, and we will talk about that because that was on the table, and that's what prosecution was going for. That was a very viable option.
Murder.
Yeah.
That was a very viable option in Arizona in 1997 in this case.
Yep.
So the defense will say their case is that Scott had fallen asleep and that at some point in his sleep or whatever, he's thinking about that pool filter. He's thinking about that faulty O-ring, and he gets up and he grabs what in his brain would be a screwdriver, but it's actually this hunting knife, and takes it out of the sheath and goes down to the pool to now fix this thing in this semi-conscious state. They will then say that, and then hypothetically, but see, this is all hypothetically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody knows these events. He's not giving it up, and now we've just got to make up the case. So hypothetically, Yarmila wakes up from being asleep on the couch. He said that he kissed her. She was lying on the couch watching TV when he went to bed. So his assumption was that she had fallen asleep on the couch. So they say that she might have woken up from the couch to go find him or tell him she was going to bed, and that she startled him in his state of fixing the pool with a knife. He turned around and stabbed her, and then continued on with the rest of this stuff. But the problem lies that he stabbed her 44 times. That takes effort, time, and strength. He then leaves her lying there, goes in the home, changes out of 2 sets of bloody clothing, out of work boots, takes the clothing, the work boots, the knife and its sheath, puts them in a Tupperware box, then walks to his garage, opens the trunk, opens the spare tire container, puts them in that compartment, closes the trunk, walks back in, gets washed up, puts on his new PJs, and then comes back out to check on her. And this is about when Greg, the neighbor, gets into the picture prior to the 911 call, right? So he then is still in this sleepwalk stage, guys,
Mm-hmm.
like per the defense, after he's done all of these things, when you don't recognize things, seems to somehow recognize that the dog is making this noise and shushes him, then walks back out the door over to Yarmila. So now, where we know per other sleepwalking experts, you don't have a recollection of like time and place and like where objects are in that sense, particularly if they're objects out of the normal pattern. like your bed and your chair in your bedroom, you would recognize or know to be there and to walk around.
Otherwise, you'd
Your
stub your toe, fall over, or
Yeah.
do something like if she
right,
changed something in the middle of the night or
right.
whatever. Right?
Your wife lying on the concrete, you're not going to know to go back to her now.
Yep.
Okay.
Without tripping on her, maybe.
So he goes back to her, hand over face, stands back up, walks back in. Keep in mind, guys, we're still sleeping. Walks back in, washes hands, dons gloves, comes back out, grabs her hands, pulls her to the pool, rolls her in, and then holds her under.
Right.
So some of the defense was saying, and I thought probably their weakest moment, because they were saying, well, why? This is a very smart man. Why would he kill his wife with his kids at home? Why would he loves his kids. Why would he allow them to find her? Why would he do that? Why would he, do this with the light on near the pool and, all these kinds of things? Well, I'll tell you why he did it. He did it because I think his defense was going to be that there was an intruder, because he planned to fully go back in that house and go to bed and wake up to his kids finding her, or a neighbor, or anyone but himself, so he can say that someone did this to his wife.
Right.
I thought a ridiculous defense would be, why would he let the kids, if he was purposefully killing her, why would he do it in a way that the kids could find her? I'm like, well, he's already killing her.
Right.
He's already got
Do we think
he
has
doesn't
a
care
heart at
about their
this point?
feelings because their
Right.
mom's about to be dead. Like, I'm not sure
Right.
what that even means.
Within the dressing cycle, I was just thinking about this. So if he would have had to have, so he went to bed at 10:30, right?
Ish. Yeah.
Mhm.
10:30-ish. He would have theoretically gotten undressed and ready for bed and gotten into bed,
Right.
which means he would have had to get redressed, put his boots back on, like he was going to go to work or something like that. Go
Very great
downstairs,
point.
Start doing all the things, doing
Yeah.
the work on the pool, murdering his wife, doing all that. Then go back upstairs, get undressed
Change.
again out of the two
'Cause
layers,
in
put
your sleep,
everything
would you have
in
recognized that you needed to
all
get
within the
changed and put the
span
stuff up?
of an hour.
Yeah.
Listen,
Right.
I will tell you a point that you just
By
made
the
that,
police arriving would have been
Yeah.
within 1 hour.
yeah, and a point that you just made that I hadn't even considered in all of this was the getting out of bed to get dressed into clothing. But
Right.
now we say that maybe he didn't ever put on clothes. If she was asleep on the couch, like he says, let's say that part is true. Maybe he never changed into anything. You know what I
He just
mean?
went to crashed out,
Just
whatever.
woke her up at some point to come out and look at the pool or whatever. However
Okay.
he got, I think it would be easy enough to get her out of there. Now I
There
will
you go.
tell you, there wasn't a clear motive, but we know that you don't have to have a motive to prosecute, but it's nice to have one. There was not a clear motive, however.
That was my
There
other
wa-
question. What was the whole motive for this? Like life insurance, or he just
Correct.
didn't like his wife after a while, or
Well,
But
and
I-
that's a good
you know
question,
what?
but like I said, we don't have to have one, and they didn't
Yeah.
really. They couldn't really
he just
provide a
murdered
motive.
somebody. I
It can be
guess,
for
right?
funsies. Yeah.
I mean, whatever. Yeah.
Need a new hobby.
State time.
So, but what we do find out later, though, keep in mind that even from the get-go, before they were married, she was not as enthralled with the Mormon church as he was, and that caused their relational, demise early on, and they got back together, and she got back in it.
Okay.
So then she, moving on into this stage of their marriage, he was working all the time. I mean, he was putting in almost 2 full-time jobs worth
In a
of
week.
hours per
Yeah.
week. And then when he wasn't doing, and that's providing him stress. So even if they're not arguing at home, he couldn't have been that much fun to be around, to be fair.
Yeah.
And he was making a ton of money, but it was coming with a lot of work. We do find out that he was on top of, like, he was heading up a couple of projects that potentially were on the chopping block soon at work. So he did have the stress of those. And then he evidently, when he wasn't at work, which was seemingly
All the time.
always,
Mhm.
then he was at the church planning, like with lesson plans and things like that for the week. He also wanted more children. Can you imagine that Yarmila might not have with all of
The
that
kids
being
were,
the
you
case?
said what, 14?
Yeah,
They're
they were
teenagers.
young teenagers at this point. So
Mhm.
first of all, my youngest is 10, and I'm telling you, no thanks. But
You're off the hook, BC.
he's so he was completely like not even ever home. He's never
Right.
home and he's working
Right.
all the time. And now he's kind of pressuring her for more kids. And she doesn't want them. And then you find out that like when her body was found, she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Now, this is something else we've talked about. Like we don't know. She could take her wedding ring off before bed every night and put
Yeah.
it back on the next morning. We don't know
Mhm.
that about them,
Yep.
but for what everyone else knew, she never took it off. So the fact that she not wearing it because there was a bit of a dispute at home. I don't know. That could be a far stretch, but
Yeah.
it's something to take note of. She wasn't wearing it. Now the day he would say to police before this sleepwalking defense became what it became. Because at first the defense was going to go with the plea of insanity. Just like he snapped, that's why he doesn't remember. So keep in mind, then they learn that he has a sleepwalking history, and then we go with that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So, excuse me. So Scott said before the defense was sleepwalking that the night prior he had woken up around 3 a.m. because he thought he heard footsteps in the backyard. That story kind of goes nowhere. It doesn't get corroborated. It doesn't really get brought up again. And I think he's
That was
saying
his
that
alibi. Yep.
because that was
Setting it
his
up.
alibi.
That was gonna
That's
be his
exactly
alibi.
what he was setting up, and that the next day they would find her in the pool in this blood,
Yep.
and someone had been at the home. Absolutely, I 100% agree. So there was
Real quick question: so going back to the hunting knife?
Yeah.
Did the kids ever say, "Hey, Dad was an avid hunter"? Like I've got plenty of knives. You know what I mean? Like where guys have knives. I don't know. It's the thing,
right. So
something like that. Like, is this something particular? Or was it something that he recently
Why did he have this knife? In other words.
Yeah, like
right. So we will get to that real quick. Marine's Blood in the chat said his wife has gone through different wedding bands due to like your fingers
Size.
changing sizes.
Yeah.
That's a
Mhm.
great point.
Yeah.
In fact, Yarmila had put on some pounds recently, and we hear that Scott, one of his friends had referred to Yarmila as quote dumpy. And so when asked about that, Scott said, no, I never called her that. He said he liked her figure, whatever, but it's an interesting little something in there. But maybe it could be, did he resent her for the weight, or did she just have it off because she had it off, or was it
10 o'clock at
uncomfortable,
night.
or
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows? Now, in terms of the knife, you know what? I think I forgot to put a picture of the knife up. It was not like a large hunting knife. I would say the blade looked to be between like maybe about 4 inches long, 3 to 4 inches. It wasn't like a huge hunting knife. So it was deemed hunting knife. I have not seen any reports about him hunting. Doesn't mean he didn't. I don't know when he would have had the time. He's an engineer that's constantly at work. My assumption would be it's just a knife he had that is being referred to as a hunting knife. Now, it's interesting, though, because there's a bit of confusion with that knife because it was found, like I said, in that Tupperware with the rest of the clothes, but he would reference another knife, I guess. And then when he was confronted with the idea of this knife, he said his words were on the stand. Oh, because by the way, the defense team put this dude on the stand. I think they fully felt that the jury was going to empathize with him. And so they, in a very bold, not super wise move, puts the defendant, which, guys, if you're not familiar, when you are the defendant in a murder trial, you are not going to be speaking because on cross, you are going to be pulled apart.
Yep.
Generally speaking, unless it is a surefire, the jury will empathize with you, and they're gonna
self-defense something.
Yeah,
like
they're gonna be
straight up, there's
compelled
video.
to. Yeah, they're gonna be compelled to believe you and be with you on this. He's been described as glib, like just kind of flat, glib. I'm not sure what about him they thought the jury
He's
was
an
gonna
engineer.
just. It's all brain power, not necessarily all the personality, right? So either way, he gets on stand and he says, which did not paint him in a good light with the jury, when you say something, it puts things in people's heads. However it is that you say it, you got to be careful with the words you use. So he used the word misled. When they were referring to this knife, he said something like he was referencing a different knife. They mentioned the actual murder weapon, and he said, oh, okay, I forgot about that one. I just got that one recently. And he said, I'm sorry, I might have misled prosecution there. And that the jurors later say that put a bad taste in their mouth.
This one's a little
Um,
stabbier.
This one's a little stabbier. It's a little fresher. That blade's a little newer. So there was also talk of this one. We'll just kind of keep this one out in the perimeter. Just know it exists, but we don't know a lot about it. But when they talk about that quote athletic mouthpiece, again, I'm saying like mouth guard is, I'm sure what that is. That was in that Tupperware. They ran it for DNA, and while they say that they cannot, like, it's inconclusive whether or not it had Scott's DNA on it, but it was also results to the point that they couldn't rule him out. So I started thinking about that, and I don't know why he would have worn it. He is smart. He's probably thinking around every corner he can get to. And let's say son Michael comes home from football practice or whatever and throws his mouth guard. If he's like my kids, he'll throw all the gross stuff wherever it doesn't go. So like throws that mouth guard on the kitchen counter or something, right? And makes himself a snack. Maybe this is all speculation here, but the fact that it was in there with the bloody stuff, I don't know. We'll see. But maybe it's something that maybe Scott sees it and thinks, like if she fights me and hits my lip, if my lip hits my tooth, it's going to bust my lip. If I've got that on, my lip won't bust. That's a lot of premeditation, but if he premeditated, right? He's thinking. He's a thinker. So
I've never heard of anybody saying, hey, I'm going to put a mouth guard
on to murder someone. I mean,
it wouldn't be the worst thing, right?
Well, I mean, he's such a brainiac. Maybe most people.
That's what I'm saying.
He overthinks everything. Yeah, probably. You know what I mean? He's process oriented.
Now that was just me obviously speculating, but they talk about that briefly being in there, and I started kind of thinking about that last night. Like, why would that be? And I think that could be something. Or you know what? Maybe maybe it just was in that box already. Maybe you know what I mean. Maybe it has nothing to do with anything. And they can't rule him out because his son used it and they've got familial DNA. I don't, that one piece of this whole weird puzzle doesn't matter much, but I did want to include it because it's mentioned. They do then have the son and daughter take the stand. Again, that's a bit of a bold move. Bold in the sense that often children aren't on the stand to testify in a murder trial that involves both of their parents in this way. But they wanted the jury to hear from the kids, and the kids agreed to do so.
Okay.
Both get up there. They don't say anything earth-shattering. They kind of corroborate a lot of what Scott said, in that, it was a happy family. There wasn't really any fighting. Everybody was getting along. Money was fine. They couldn't find any stressors. The only thing that was a little different is that's when Michael, the son, when they pressed him a little bit about the car, he explained it to be such that the trunk, that dad almost always kept it locked, including the trunk. And when they asked, I guess, about like ease of access to the vehicle, he would say that it's a tight squeeze to get into the trunk of the car where it's generally parked in the garage, which would then be to the prosecution's point that if he was sleepwalking, yet another obstacle to get in there and get to it and put this Tupperware of clothing away.
Right. I did have one question because you had said that they put the cause of death, stabbing and drowning.
Mm-hmm.
How
she was alive when she went into the pool.
But so the drowning would have killed her, not the stabbing. But
correct. So what they found out is I read one report, but we talk about this all the time too. Just take things that you read, with a grain of salt, because like when I read 17 different like writings on cases, often you read one thing, you kind of want to hang on it, and then you realize like all the way around that was not actually the case. That one little thing, which could have been a thing. I read somewhere that there was water in her lungs. Maybe there was, but actually when I read from the medical examiner's testimony at court, it sounds like there was water in the upper nasal sinuses. So think up above your nose. So like above and behind your nose, kind of like between your eyebrows, back in there. I didn't hear anything from the medical examiner about there being water in the lungs.
Okay.
All that would mean is it was either a deeper breath or not, but it does indicate that Yarmila took some sort of an inspiration, some sort of a breath in while under the water, meaning she was not she was not dead when she reached the water. Would she have died before she was drowned? Probably. Yeah. Probably if he'd let her lay there,
would've been-
when he checked on her and she was still alive, he had to seal the deal. But had he let her lay there, she probably would have succumbed to her wounds. It sounds like, in fact, they talk about a couple of the knife wounds being potentially fatal wounds. They just can't say for sure. For sure, technically, when you get in the weeds, the drowning is what caused the death,
Right.
but
It just
either
had-
would have.
It
Right.
just
Yeah.
finished her off. Yeah, because when you have that many, all it takes
Interesting.
is a nick on an artery or something like that, right? After and just sitting there for so long.
Well,
You're gonna
she would
bleed
just
out
bleed out
before you-
eventually.
Yeah.
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 Did the kids wake up before?
No, so the
while it
kids
was
never
happening?
woke up, and that's another
Before the
thing. As I
police-
was kind of brainstorming this last night, the kids never woke up, and that is actually to the defense's point. What they will say is, why would he have done this? This actually mostly occurred under the children's bedroom windows out back.
In those back windows, yeah.
So
thinking
like,
that.
why would he have done this knowing the kids were asleep right there? And then I started thinking about it, and that's when I started going back and forth on whether or not I thought it was premeditated. But I do, because while he is smart, when you're in a moment of trauma, when you're in a moment of heightened alert like that, you still don't think about all the things. And it sounds like he thought about all the things.
Yes.
So I don't know why he would have done it under their windows unless he knew they were very sound sleepers, or this is speculatory, but
30 at
what-
night.
it's speculatory. But what if they ingested some Benadryl or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's gonna be out
And
of your
he knew
system
they were
pretty
going to be
quick, right?
asleep. It
Yeah.
would, but they didn't test them. It's not like they did a tox
Yeah, no,
report on the
right.
kids.
Why would
Right.
they? Right?
Why
Mom
would
was
they?
just- yeah, no.
So, and who knows? I don't think, I couldn't hang my hat on premeditation or not just on that one fact about the kids. But when you look
Agreed.
at the whole picture, it certainly does look like he thought about this too
He
much.
thought
This was
through.
too
Mhm.
perfect. Yeah, especially with for me, I'll tell you one thing that I keep going back to is that story about waking up at 3 a.m. the night before.
And
hearing footsteps.
somebody.
You wouldn't say that. Like, you would if you think you can continue on with that storyline, but it otherwise doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter if you're then going to go with the fact that you were sleepwalking. So
Right.
I just think that he was definitely trying to start to weave a story of the idea of an intruder.
I think he was
Um,
weaving the story, and then he used the O-ring as the excuse for the sleepwalking.
Mhm.
Like, she gave him what he
A
needed
chore.
to
His head.
be.
Yeah.
Oh, this can be what I, or he may not have even thought about it from like a sleepwalking perspective at that standpoint, but he was
Right.
like, this is how I'm
Something
going
to
lure
draw her
out.
outside.
Yeah, I'm going
Mhm.
to lure her out. And then I'm going to kill her, and I'm going to blame it on somebody else because I heard people in my backyard the night before. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, this is another very interesting point. Sleepwalkers cannot differentiate between day and night. So like light and dark.
Oh,
But
didn't know
the
that.
neighbor Greg, when he remember he turned on lights when he went inside. There was at one point when he grabbed a flashlight when he came outside.
Right.
Okay.
You
So
shine it on him
there's
say?
did he shine it on
on
Scott.
Scott. You shine the flashlight on Scott.
no, that Scott grabbed a flashlight.
Oh, Scott did. I'm sorry.
grabbed-
So
I
the
thought you said the
neighbor
sleepwalker
too.
was
Yeah.
going outside in the dark, but
Okay.
with the aid of his trusty flashlight.
Right.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, so I think that it comes down to the fact that when I was looking into sleepwalking, and so I think we can't dispute that he suffered from sleepwalking into his adult years. We can't dispute that. We can't dispute quite a few things, and I think a lot of people were even saying like, that even the jury said like, okay, look, had she just been stabbed, even 44 times. Had she just been stabbed and that was it, and he wakes up or cops get there or whatever, we might could buy the sleepwalking. Like if these experts start testifying on sleep disorders and whatnot, like maybe. Obviously, it's the 17,000 other very conscious and, tiny purposeful things that he did after that they were like, I don't buy it for a minute. So the trial was around 6 weeks long. They deliberated for, it was either 4 or 8 hours. Sources say different things. Either way, a very short amount of time for a first degree murder charge, and came back almost immediately, same day, with a guilty verdict. Now, when it came to the death penalty, the judge wanted to weigh essentially character witnesses and mainly the wishes of the children. So that's why the children testified. And then separately, they talked to the judge and they talked about the death penalty. The children did not want him to receive it. They maintained that they, loved him and that they don't have ill will toward their dad or necessarily ill feelings, at least as of now. I don't know specifically. I think daughter's like 44, 45 now, kids of her own. I don't know how she feels about dad now, but everything I've read so far, they all maintained a good relationship with him. The son, Michael, now lives in Vegas. So with dad being in Arizona, he still goes and visits him currently in prison. Scott resides there at the Yuma prison complex in Arizona. He did, like I said, get that life sentence without the possibility of parole. But the kids did not want him to get the death penalty. And the judge, that weighed heavily with the judge. And so when it came time for that portion, the judge went lenient on that. So he did go to prison. He did, get that conviction of life without the possibility of parole, but they took the death penalty off the table, like I said, at the urging of the children. Now, some of the things you'll read say that even Yarmila's parents did not want him to receive the death penalty. And they will say, I think one of the things was written kind of along the lines of they wanted him to go to prison because he had done this, but did not want him to receive the death penalty. Some things will say because they wanted to honor the children's wishes. But I've read other reports that say things because people like to speculate a lot, which I've not done at all on this show tonight. But that have said that, they didn't want him to receive the death penalty because they just didn't feel like he deserved it. And then I kind of started thinking too, but if Yarmila and Scott grew up Catholic, their parents were likely still Catholic. And I can't say across the board, but generally speaking, a lot of times Catholicism is known to be a bit against capital punishment. So, do they not want him to get the death penalty because they didn't think he deserved it, or because they just are anti-capital punishment? I don't know.
The religion,
Right.
Yeah. So either way, he didn't receive it. He actually looks healthier and happier now than he does in those pictures.
He's not working 80 hours anymore.
Exactly.
Out,
right?
3 meals a day,
3
sleeping.
squares, get some sleep. Now, the picture that I was remiss to, I did not put it up here, and I wish I had of. I will put it on Instagram on Andrea Uplate, you guys. So take a look. It's the picture taken of Scott when he was very first brought into the jail. So when officers get there, this has all just happened. They take him right in, take his picture, and then sit him down to talk to him. He's got on, like I said, the white, clean t-shirt top, the black and red, flannel plaid PJ bottoms, and he's looking straight ahead at the camera. Now, we know that he has a ton of lack of sleep that is built up over time. That's fine. You would expect maybe some dark circles under his eyes, some baggy eyes. Everybody's body reacts differently. Some people are a bit more sensitive and will get those worse than others.
Okay.
He instead has on the inside, like the inside corner, like the on each side of his nose, his nasal bridge right between his eyes are black. Meaning if you take the inner corner of your eyes, guys, if you're not watching this, the inner corner of your eyes and touch your nose right there up top, black on each side. Now, yeah, he's got a little darkness under his eyes, probably from lack of sleep. It looks to me like dude got whacked in the nose. His nose looks a bit askew, and it looks like he's forming black eyes from a broken nose, which I wouldn't be surprised by. She's got all those wounds on her hands. It looks to me like she knocked him straight in that nose.
Okay.
That's kind of beside any of the points, but it's interesting.
One can hope.
Exactly.
That shows you defense. Again, I mean, if he broke,
that would have woken him up if he was sleepwalking.
Yeah. Well, there's another point that I was thinking. I was like, do people go take sleep showers? Like if he went and got into the pool, wouldn't water startle you? Well,
but his arms got in the pool when he held her down.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're getting
exactly.
Into water,
so to the prosecution's point, Right. To the prosecution's point, their sleep
I would've been
expert did
shocked.
say exactly that, that the cold water of the pool, if nothing else, should have shocked him awake.
Yeah.
Real
Exactly.
quick, what time of year was this? Does it
This
say?
was January of 97.
Okay, I'll tell you what. And I would do this every year in Phoenix. I would jump into the pool earlier and earlier and earlier. Right? Normally, I think the earliest I ever did it was like the end of February.
End of February.
And
yeah.
it was so cold. I mean, the pool would be like, because 50 degrees,
50.
something like that.
Ooh.
And jumping in and jumping out. That doesn't sound super cold to some people, but getting in and getting out, it's cold.
It's cold. That would have woken him up.
Yeah, I'm telling you. It might as well have been an ice bath.
Ugh.
I don't care what
Yeah.
this dude's
So he would have
trying to
woken
say.
up. I mean, at every turn, I can't. When I try to let my brain, like I said, as I was reading the defense's case, you start getting in kind of brain mode at that point, and I was like, okay. I mean, they're swaying me. They're swaying, maybe, and then you look at the totality of the events and all of the
Right.
very purposeful actions that he
Mhm.
exhibited, and there is no way. Now, I will tell you, to this day, that was what, 97. So now we're pushing 27
26.
years almost.
Yep.
And he maintains to this day that he has zero recollection of the events, that he was sleepwalking. He doesn't know what happened. He wish he hadn't have. He hopes that she forgives him, but that he does not remember it. So I'll give him that. He's had an exemplary record, all the things, yada, yada. I don't
Right.
care. I don't think he's a serial violent person. I mean, I think this
Right.
happened, but
Mhm.
I think the only thing that makes me like even slightly like maybe it was sleepwalking is there's just not a motive, like
right.
usually.
That we know of, though, right?
Right,
Because that's the
right.
thing too. There could be, those kids could go to bed and those two could give each other scathing quiet words at night. Like, we don't know.
Right.
There are some people out there who on social media want to give all these, like, let me tell you about my life and my relationship or lack thereof, and woe is me, and here, know all about it. You're never going to look at my social media, I promise you that, and know anything about any
No.
problems in paradise.
Right.
Nor are a lot of family members. You might find maybe one girlfriend or something that you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to find people who know about what's going on inside my home. And so when people say that they had this great relationship and there were no problems, that's great. And probably for the most part, there hadn't been. But that doesn't mean that there weren't.
Right.
We
Absolutely.
can't
There was no
just count
social
on that.
media back there
Well-
then anyway. There was no way to actually
I
know
agree.
unless
I
somebody
agree
heard
to a
or knew
point, but I
something.
also agree like if you have kids, when you think they're not around, you may not be as quiet, So I
Yeah.
just feel like and for me, I'm like, no. Well, I'm also like a fiery Hispanic woman. When I get mad at Greg,
The neighbors here.
no, they don't. But people know because I'll be like, let me tell you what this fool did, But
Not
Hold
on
up. And
social
then you
media.
guys just got a pool. Let me ask you, Beth, how is
Yeah.
y'all's O-ring?
Better be fine because
yeah,
it's brand new.
Okay. Well, you've got my number, Beth. That's all
We're
I'm
good. We're good.
saying.
You have to worry more about him getting killed in the middle of the night because he talks. In
That's
his
probably
sleep
fair.
so much that, and I was laughing because you were like, who shushes the dog? Greg does when he talks in his sleep. He shushes the dogs at
But
least.
okay, let me
once.
ask you this. Does he shush the dog because the dog is making noise or
No.
because that's a noise that Greg is used to making?
Yes. Greg is used to
Yeah,
the
I'm
noise.
used to
and
yelling
So
at
it
my
wasn't a
dog.
purposeful shush, right? That's
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where I differentiated
It's
because
just
I'm
like
pretty
life.
sure his
I'm replaying life in
yes,
my head.
I think
basically,
his talking
right?
is past
Yep.
I'm usually
experiences.
swearing at somebody
Yes.
or talking to somebody at work or
Do you ask him questions, Beth?
No, because I just hit him with a pillow and make him roll over.
Okay.
I
Okay.
wiggle his pillow. I don't really hit him.
See, you wonder
'cause I'm
how it
nice.
escalates?
I'm really nice. I just kind of like wiggle his pillow and he'll roll over. But so and I sleep that I know of. I had 2 sleepwalking incidences. One when was I was a child.
Yeah, walked
Okay.
outside the house.
I walked outside. We were at my grandparents' house in Brownsville, Texas, and it was the 70s, so nobody locked their doors, right? And I walked out the screen door at like everybody was still up, 10 o'clock at night. Just walked out the front door. My mom's like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "I'm gonna go catch the train," and you could hear the train in the background. And she was like, "Okay, well, you're going the wrong direction. You need to come this way to catch the train." So I turned around and she just steered me back to bed. The second time was in college during finals. That's when I thought about it. It was really stressful. My roommate said at 1 o'clock in the morning, I got up and started walking down the hall and she's like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "To a poker game. Let's go." She was like, okay, your poker games in you got to go get your stuff in your. So both times people were easily able to direct me.
Well,
But,
if you're catching trains and playing poker in your sleepwalking days, it doesn't sound terrible.
it doesn't, right?
It could be
I mean,
worse. It's
I could- yeah.
adventurous.
Yeah, I think
luckily
they
it doesn't
do
happen
Oh, man.
anymore.
I'm settled.
I can't remember the last time college was a really long time ago. So it's been forever.
Scott
but-
Flater did it. Guilty.
Right. So
What's
what's your
Yes,
okay?
charged.
Yeah. Okay, Greg, tell me what you got.
Guilty
Your
as
turn.
charged, man. There's too many. You pointed out too many things that this dude should have just woken up.
Mhm.
Hey, if it was like, to your point, you're doing dishes and accidentally, hey,
Yeah,
shit, I killed my
Right.
wife.
because I was cleaning the knife.
Yeah, I was
Not
like
necessarily I
literally
went to
doing
go find
dishes or
the
something
knife.
like that.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe, but
Yeah, I have to concur.
can't
I think he's
see
guilty.
anything.
I think that the defense just went for what they thought might help.
Yeah.
it's a
You know,
stretch, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
damn.
think but they had some scientific.
I think it was fair though. I think that's you have no other. If you're on the
Tried, yeah.
defense side,
Yeah.
you got nothing else. This is a great. I mean,
for straws.
it's a good one to go with. Well, I
Well, you
mean,
had science behind it, right? He has this D wave.
and even better though, it's a
Whatever
vague
it was.
science, so you can
Yeah.
kind of manipulate
Yeah,
it
that's a good
as
point.
needed.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's a really good point.
You know,
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Oh, we just get lost. We just get kicked out.
I think so.
Well,
Oh, wait.
I don't know
Well,
if
I
it's
still show us.
us.
No, I still show
Yeah,
us.
I see us on here. So I think Andrea got dropped off. We'll have to wait for her to come back
Yeah,
on.
we'll wait. Give it a second.
But it's been a really cool case.
It
I would
was.
say. I mean,
I did.
it was a very interesting case that as far as
It's
I can tell.
there's the ability to get so overworked that you do lose your mind, and
I can
maybe
see
he
that
was
part
just
happening
tired
for
of.
sure.
Maybe he was just tired of providing.
He was just done.
Yeah.
That was with its end, right? I don't
Yeah.
know.
yeah. So thanks y'all for carrying on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I was gonna say though, this we'll leave it on a little bit. It's not funny, but to make kind of a funny note out of this, there was one juror who later said, and he said at first, kind of what a lot of them did, right? Like, yeah, okay, I could buy sleepwalking if 44, if she was stabbed but not then
Mhm.
dragged and drowned and all the things.
Right.
But he said, and I thought, who is this creep? And don't someone needs to alert someone about him or alert his wife or whatever, because he says, I think that he was sleepwalking and that he stabbed her. Or no, he said, I think that it could be possible that he was sleepwalking and stabbed her in his sleep, but then woke up during it and freaked out and then just
Maybe.
drowned her.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I'm like, no, wait, you wake up to murdering the love of your life, and your first thought is, oh, shit.
I
we
gotta
gotta
rinse her-
finish
maybe he was trying to
we gotta
wash her
finish
off.
this over, Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Who's this guy?
funny.
That's a little, I don't think
That's
that's your
funny.
next step,
Either way, he
right?
still drowned her.
I also think Carly and Benet is funny because she was like, when you accidentally fell, she's like, oh no, someone find who killed Andrea. So I thought that was cute. That was funny.
That's
I
really
have
yeah.
no idea who killed me. Yeah, so anyway, I looked up, they're not that interesting, but a few sleepwalking murders and whatever. Either way, I think it was I'll give the defense kudos in the sense that in creativity world,
What?
good job for them there. Outside of that, the dude did it. There's
Yeah.
no getting around it. I'll give him also some tenacity points for maintaining the story this whole time.
Hey,
But-
fake it till you make it, right? I mean, maybe
Right?
finally he'll believe himself.
Lord, that's the story of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
He may actually believe it himself at this point. I've heard
Yeah.
people, people will do that for,
Yep.
about all sorts of things in life.
Exactly.
So you guys, we'll start wrapping it up, but moving forward, if you guys want to continue with Night Shift, hit that subscribe button, y'all. It doesn't cost a dime. People think
Do
it
it.
costs some money sometimes, and it's free. Hit it on the
Free.
Andrea Up Late YouTube channel, and if you haven't already, go and subscribe to Beth and Greg's channel, which is called The
Yes.
Bar is Open Podcast. So
Yeah.
you can go over there, subscribe to them. They've got merch at Minor League Studio. I'm about to have some new merch at Minor League Studio. Some t-shirts and stickers and whatnot. So we'll post that when it comes out. Follow each one of us on the names I just gave, Andrea Up Late and The Bar is Open. And from there you can find all their individual stuff as well. But like it, subscribe it, review it, all the stuff, guys. I hate saying it. So much. But now that I'm
Makes
solo,
a
I'm trying to make
difference.
it
Makes a
grow.
deal.
Gosh,
Yeah,
it does.
absolutely.
It does.
Yes.
I just realized that yesterday that I wasn't following me, meaning my own personal account wasn't following my show's account. And I was like, well, it's
'Cause
been
you
like a
go
year and a
back
half.
and forth.
That
Yeah,
happened to
that's always
me
awesome.
too. So I think it happens to all of us.
Yeah, I was like, oh, well, look at that. I'm not even following me. So
Look, I just
do
got
the
one
thing.
more.
It helps. One of these days I'd like to grab a sponsor or two again, so that would be cool. But you know what? Hey, thank you guys. I always love it when y'all come
Absolutely.
on. It's
These are
always
fun.
a
These are a blast.
pleasure. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you guys are doing great. Come over to the East Coast and hang out a little bit. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely.
And
Sounds like a plan.
yeah, and for everyone else, we will see y'all next Tuesday.
Hit the thumbs up on
Thumbs
your
up
way
it. Bye,
out.
guys. Thanks
Cheers.
again.
Hit that thumbs up. Y'all just keep talking because it always takes me. I always say I'm going to end
No,
it.
we're good.
Then there's a lot of fun dead space.
Yeah.
This is a great case.